I am joined by AzulGG, one of the best Pokemon TCG players in the world. The winner of both NAIC and OCIC. His most recent top finish is a top 4 finish at Worlds 2023. One of the best to ever do it. How are you doing? Are you prepared to do something that you're totally unprepared for?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm as prepared as I'm gonna be. I've done a couple of these with a couple other card games where I try and guess some of the other cards, and I haven't played much of any of those card games either. Very little experience with Snap as well. But yeah, I'm ready to see what the game looks like from the first time that I played it, which is when it came out. I don't. Has it been like a year, 2 years? How long's it been?
Global release was, I want to say, October of 2022.
Okay, okay.
So
It's been a
it's
little
been a
while.
while. It's been a little while. And the
All right, I'm
game,
ready.
like the fundamentals of the game are still similar. I'm going to run through that just so you have like the baseline in your head, right? You win the game by winning 2 out of 3 locations. Decks are 12 cards. You can run one copy of any card in a deck. And the locations all have basically, some ability that impacts the way in which the game played out. There are 4 spots on each location, and you cannot put more than 4 cards in those 4 spots. You have 6 turns in Marvel Snap. On those 6 turns, you get an extra energy each time. So on turn 1, you have 1 energy. On turn 2, you have 2 energy. Up to 6 energy on turn 6. There are cards that vary that, like cards that give you energy, things of that nature, but mostly that's how the game gets played out. The vanilla stat lines I have here ready to show you. If you look at the card, the blue is the energy that it costs to play, and the orange is the power that it has. Does this all seem familiar so far?
Yep, yep, makes
Okay.
sense.
All right. And one final note, turns in Marvel Snap are simultaneous. And you know this, I believe, but I'm not sure your audience will. Simultaneous turns. So you play your cards, and that's it. That's your turn. Your opponent plays their cards at the same time, and placement and which lanes people are targeting to win can really matter. So
But
let's start. Mm,
it's like revealed like you both play your cards and then it's revealed who played what where at the same time, right?
yes, it's not like exactly the same time. The person who's winning, their cards are revealed first, but
Yeah.
it's still like in the same, I guess you'd call it reveal step, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
cards are played simultaneously and then they're revealed in order of who's currently winning the game.
All right, sounds good.
So vanilla stat lines, Misty Knight is a 1/2, costs 1 to power. Shocker is a 2/3, costs 2, 3 power. And then it scales up from there. It's a 3/4, it's a 4/6, it's a 5/9, and a 6/12. And you can pretty much sort of see how, more energy invested gets you a, not necessarily a better ratio, but more specific points out of one card, right? It's a balance of card economy a little bit some of the
Yeah,
time. And from there, we're gonna jump into the first card.
let's do it.
Okay, so first card on the docket is Angel, and I do have one note for you here. That AVX thing, ignore it. It's not real. They're doing like a temporary event while I'm filming this. That's just not real text the card has normally. It's
Hmm.
like a week long, special event thing, but it's not worth taking into account when evaluating the card.
Okay.
Angel is a 1/2. When one of your cards is destroyed, this flies out of your hand or deck to replace it.
All right. So I guess like the two big things to think about here are how many cards do you usually have in a spot to I guess the big thing I'm thinking about here is how often do you have cards in your hand? Because obviously this is in your deck. I know you don't see your whole deck all the time. So you don't see your whole deck. And what am I trying to guess? Am I just trying to guess if it's good or bad? Is that like the
Yeah. You're pretty
all
much
right?
just you're pretty much just vibing out. I tend not to restrict people to like just binary thumbs up, thumbs down. Just
Yeah, yeah,
give
yeah.
me your impression of the card and tell me why, and I'll just tell you how like close to the ball you are basically.
Okay. So the two things that stand out here to me is like how often do cards actually get destroyed? Or if you're playing a deck around where maybe you destroy your own cards to gain advantages, like if a character or a hero can only be put into play if it destroys another hero in the lane. If it's in the deck, it sounds great because then it just kind of replaces some of the power you just lost in that lane. The big hang up here is like how much does this hurt your consistency in the early game? But if all 1-drops are 1/2s, then it just kind of has like a bonus effect. And then how often do you actually have cards in your hand? Because if you're able to play out to like a 0-card hand fairly often, then this would just kind of sit in your hand and not get value unless you play it yourself. And you see the majority of your deck throughout a game, right? Like usually you're going to see 9 of 12.
Correct.
So, but if every 1-drop is just a 1/2, and you play a decent amount of 1-drops in a deck to be able to stay on tempo, having a 1-drop turn 1, 2-drop turn 2, so on and so forth, then I would say this card is pretty good unless the effects of other 1-drops are that much better. So I would just say this is probably a decent card.
So that's really compelling analysis, except I think it missed one major aspect of Marvel Snap. And it's like, yes, if everyone is playing 1-drops, right, then this is a 1-drop with upside. Sure. But you don't necessarily have to be playing 1-drops. Like, it's a card economy issue. If you're spending like multiple slots in your deck on a 1/2, and your opponent is able to play a 5/9 or a 6/12, they've invalidated any number of those 1/2s because of the way like putting cards in your deck works. So for the most part, I would say the most unplayable cards in Marvel Snap are 1/2s with small upside. 1/2 small upside, like you look at that, most of the time, those are the worst cards in the game because the small upside isn't worth putting them in your deck. And when you do put them in your deck, they tend to get invalidated as you search for that small upside. That's the issue that a card like Angel has. Now, it's not to say there are absolutely zero 1/2s with upside that are played, but I think if I'm racking my brains here, in terms of 1/2s with upside that are seriously played in good decks, I think it's one. I think there's one.
One.
And it's not Angel.
And is it played at a count of 1? Like, is that, or how many
It.
played?
I'm sorry, wait, what?
What is the count that is played? Wait, in Marvel Snap, can you only play 1 of each card?
Yeah.
No, I don't. Oh, okay. So you can play 12 cards. You can only play 1 of each
Yeah.
card. And 1-drops. What's the average amount of 1-drops in top decks is how many?
I mean, I think that's kind of a loaded question for reasons I can't really get into late until a little bit later. But the average number of
Okay.
1-drops you put into your top deck is pretty low unless they're doing something extremely specific. And Angel
Okay.
isn't big enough upside or, useful enough when, like, even in a deck where you mentioned destroying your own stuff for benefit, right? There is a deck that does that. He doesn't make the cut there.
Yeah. So there's no so the tempo of 1-drop on 1 isn't really a thing in Marvel Snap.
It gets very invalidated by later bigger cards, right?
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
you are limited on board space, you end up in this situation where it's like, okay, I 1-dropped on 1, and now I've made my like total possible power in that lane slightly lower because you can only put
Okay.
4
Yeah,
cards
that
in a
makes
lane.
sense.
You're like, I'm 1-dropping on 1, I got them, but it's like now my options are a little more limited for the future.
All right. All right. Good information for me to take with me to the next card.
These are sort of structured so that you gain that information and can make smarter decisions as you go. So I am rationing like some relevant information, but I'm giving you as much as I can without ruining it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Electro, 3/2. On reveal, meaning basically when you play him or when he reveals, +1 max energy. Ongoing, this is a static effect that happens as long as he's face up on the board. You can only play 1 card a turn.
All right. So it is a ramp card to ramp your energy, +1. The 3-drop with only 2 power, and you can only play 1 card a turn.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the biggest thing I'm hung up on here is like if you play this on 3, then you can play something on 5 a turn earlier, and then something with 6 a turn earlier. I guess like theoretically you could play a 7. Can you go higher than 6 energy?
Yeah, you can. Like, you
You
go
could
to
play
7 on 6 when you play this guy.
7 drops don't exist, right? It's just only 6 drops.
Correct. It
Or
is.
okay.
There are no 7 drops in the game right
So
now.
you, and then even then you couldn't even play a 3 and a 4
No, you
because
could
you can
not.
only play 1 card a turn. Man, it just depends. Like I could see this being like, so this should play on turn 3, and then you could play 5-drop 5 or 5-drop 6-drop 6-drop to close out the game. So it doesn't seem terrible. And again, I guess that's how you could ramp out. I don't know. That seems pretty decent. I just don't know how powerful I guess the 5 drops and 6 drops are. But when I think about it, you just get like an extra 6 drop basically before the game ends,
I
which
think
isn't
pretty
bad.
decent is sort of the right read on this, right? Where it's like, I think this is pretty decent, but if the fives and sixes aren't good, this isn't very good either. Correct
Yeah.
analysis. That's basically exactly correct. Electro, I
Yeah.
think, is a little underpowered. There are not necessarily better ramp options. Like, he's still a very consistent and good one, but there are ones with probably higher upside than him that allow you to play those fives and sixes a little bit earlier. And so he's sort of fallen by the wayside. He's the core of like a pure ramp deck that hasn't really existed for a while. Like, it's a deck you can play, but it's not like really a deck. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's no rotation in Snap, right? Like everything that they've come
Correct.
out with as far as new cards, it's all they do it they do nerf and buff stuff though, right?
Constantly. There
Yeah.
are usually about 3 patches a month, and each of
Okay.
them has like significant balance changes in them. So it's
Is
a
there
hmm.
how big is the card pool right now? What is the total number of cards?
I want to say like 250 plus
Okay. And how often do they come out with new cards?
every week.
Every week, like one or
One.
multiple?
One card every
Okay.
week.
One card
Well,
every week.
two
Okay.
cards on the beginning of a new season because there's usually a card on the season pass and then a card that comes out normally. And so it's like 5 cards a month, 4 cards a month, depending.
Yeah, I have to keep reminding myself that you can only play one of each card. Because in my head, I was thinking
Hmm.
about this. I was like, well, if you run like, if that's your deck, you play multiple of this to get it out early. But I was like, wait, you can only play one. So I feel like to consistently build your deck around ramp cards, you'd have to have other ramp cards in the deck. So yeah, like
Yes.
there's other ramp cards to play with this, so you can actually get to that 5 and 6 sooner, then playing something like this kind of makes sense, or it could work. I guess I should say,
Yeah. I mean, like,
but it
it
could work.
is a deck. You have identified a deck. It's just not a
Yeah,
very good deck, right? Like, I
it's an
do a
okay
weekly
deck.
tier list.
It
No, I do like a weekly tier list, and Electro Ramp just hasn't been on it in
doesn't even make the
months.
tier list.
No. Like, it's
Oh,
like a deck
or
where it's
Electro.
like it's like the kind of deck you put together when you don't have any better options and you're like
Yeah,
early in the game and you're like, I want to play like this, and you don't have like the stuff that lets you do the really crazy stuff, because like the fundamental failing of Electro Ramp is it ends up just being like a little too fair.
yeah, yeah. Makes sense.
So we talked already about, destroying your own stuff for fun and profit. Here is a card
Hmm.
that can destroy your own stuff for fun and profit. This is Venom, a 3/3, but his on reveal abilities is to destroy all his other cards at the location you play in. So this is where we get you introduced to the word here in Marvel Snap.
Yep,
Here refers to the location, not just like all your other cards, just the ones where you play Venom, and
makes
add
sense.
their power to him.
Yeah. I mean, this seems decent to like create more space on that location to be able to then put more cards into play there. But I'm trying to think. You only have 6 turns in a game, right? Unless
That
I'm
is correct.
you have 6 turns, you can play 6 cards. So theoretically, if you play Venom on 3, you'd have played 2 cards. That's your third card. So you have 3 other cards to play. Um,
Hold on, it's not 6 turns, so you can only play 6 cards.
that's true. You could play more cards. How many cards do you start with in an opening hand? Is it 3?
Three,
And you
and
draw
then
for
you draw
turn.
one card each turn. So
Okay.
you end
Yeah.
up with, three, then the card on one, four on one, etc.
Yeah. So I mean, this card, I guess like a big thing for me with this card. Well, I'd assume this card you would be trying to play on 3 if you did play it. And then you'd want to play a 1 drop into a 2 drop. Then you play Venom on 3 to eat those. But then from there, you only have 3 more turns of playing cards. So like, are you actually gonna be able to fill up those 3 spaces plus compete for another location? So that's what I'm getting hung up on with this card specifically is how easy is it to compete? How many cards do you generally need on average to compete for that second location? Because the goal is to win 2 of the 3 locations, right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So how easy is it to compete for that second location? Like how many cards you have to put there? Because if you have to split them like 3 and 3, this card seems like okay. But if you're able to just win one of the other locations with just 1 card, maybe 2, then this freeing up space on like the more contested location would seem pretty good, and you'd like theoretically get early tempo effects from your 1 drop and your 2 drop. So this seems like a really good like tempo card. You go 1, 2, 3. This eats the 1 and the 2. 1 and 2 did something for you, and then you have to fill out the rest of the spots on your location. So I mean, it kind of feels like it comes down to how good 1 and 2 drops are. To be honest, for the most part, is is the way I'm viewing this one. So I mean, but from what you said about what you said about the one drop when we looked at the one drop, how like one drops are pretty bad. I guess like I guess the information I'm kind of lacking here is how good is it to play a 2-drop on 2. So I'm gonna go ahead and say it does free up the space though. I'm gonna go ahead and say that, but yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say it's good. Because if I remember correctly, I felt like it was like when you were the couple games that I played of the game is like when you're contesting for your second location, you usually didn't have to invest too many cards to actually like win. There's like one location always felt really contested, and then it's like, you had to somehow like cheese the second location from your opponent. Like you and your opponent had to like make guesses on who was going to go after the second location more aggressively. If I'm remembering correctly how the game was played for the couple games I've played. So I'm going to go with it's a good card.
It is a good card, but I feel like it's one of those situations where it's like, I have no idea how you got the correct answer here, because the way you got there was not what I expected. I gave you this card after Angel because I was like, I felt like with Angel, I was like, all right, there is an archetype that destroys its own stuff for fun and profit. Angel's not good enough to make the cut. I felt like I was trying to give that to you with the Venom here. What actually ended up happening was the other way, because I told you, one drops are bad, right? And so you end up in a situation where you're evaluating Venom like the reverse of how I intended you to evaluate Venom there, which is to say, very good card, and is an entire, like, an archetype all-star, right? This is a card that is like an absolute banger in a deck that is looking to destroy its own stuff for further benefits. It's one of the best possible because you get it on both ends. You get like whatever happens when the card gets destroyed, and you get to keep their power. And so that's Venom's major role. This is not like a utility card where like you're just playing it just to play it. You play him as a destroy effect in destroy synergies, and he's probably the best destroy effect just on its face.
Are you usually trying to play this on 3, or are we waiting for like 4 and 5 drops to be played and then this to come out after that?
It's usually after. He's not a 3. Like, you really, like, what you do is you sort of set up a good Venom lane, Venom the lane, use the benefits you get from doing that, which I'm going to be vague about, but there are benefits in the deck that you would play a Venom in to sort of snowball further. He's like like that. The deck that is built for has like a couple 2s and 3s in there that are built to do something like this, and it snowballs further when you do that stuff. And Venom keeping the benefits of what you already had makes it one of the best of those.
Makes sense. Yeah, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about more like a tempo, whereas like you're going 1, 2, 3, and then it just kind of clears up space for you to play your bigger heroes on the, or what do you guys call them? Character? Is it characters, heroes? What is the?
I call them
Venom's not really a
dudes
hero.
most of the time.
Dudes.
Like, they're
make space
people.
for your other dudes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like they're there.
Yeah, make space for your other dudes, but I mean that makes sense as well. If it's just like that good to destroy stuff, this is just like one of the best destroy cards. That also makes sense.
Right, like there's like a very specific deck in which it's like, we're the destroy deck, right? That's a thing.
Yeah.
And he's like probably the best enabler for that deck. He's like the cornerstone of it, I would say.
Yeah, makes sense. Is there a I forget, is there an optional mulligan in Snap?
Nope.
No?
Not even
whatever
close.
You draw, you get. Okay.
Yep. If there was a mulligan in a game with 12 card decks, it would be real tough because you'd end up in a situation where it's like combo decks everywhere all the time.
Yeah, definitely.
Hellcow. 4/8. But it discards 2 cards, and this is random. You don't get to pick those cards. They just go away. And it's a 4/8, discards 2 cards from your hand when you play it.
Yeah. It does have that 8 power, which is pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, like when I look at a card like this, I'd be like, well, for playing cards, but you see, even if you're playing cards on tempo, if you're going 1, 2, 3, you still are discarding 2 of the other 3 cards in your. If you're going like 1, 2, 3, 4, if you're playing this on 4,
yeah,
you're still discarding 2 other cards in your hand.
Yeah.
So I feel like this, you'd have to like probably synergize with some kind of draw power, so you just have more cards to work with potentially, so you don't discard your best cards. Or I guess this is what you could play. You could play this on like 6 with a 2-drop, and then you wouldn't really care.
Correct.
So for that, it seems good. You play it on 6 because that's 8 power for 4. So you'd also get the power for the 2-drop, which is what, like usually 3 power for 2, or 4 power, right? 4 power for 2, 3 power for 2.
4. 3 is the average. 4 is like the upside.
Yeah, and then how much power do you get for a 6-drop usually? Is it we're up at like what?
It's about like the vanilla 6-drop is a 6/12. So
6/12,
you're looking
okay.
at like the same, but you're looking at a different way of distributing it.
Yeah, so you get to divvy up your power a little bit. and then you also get to get the effect if there's an effect on your 2-drop. But I feel like drawing this early is so bad because of it just discarding 2 cards before you get to like interact with those cards possibly. I guess that's the thing as well. Like drawing this early does seem bad, but you're getting like equal power for a 2-drop and a 4-drop, so you're getting the effect of the 2-drop. So it seems like okay. I'm gonna go with this card. I don't know, discarding cards does not seem very good with how few cards we see though. So drawing this early would just kind of be terrible to be honest. I'm gonna go with this card is bad.
Correct. This card is bad. This is a bad card that is bad. It's not even like the biggest 4-drop. What I'm fascinated by, though, is you correctly landed on a dynamic that I think a lot of Marvel Snap players took a while to land on, which is that a 4 and a 2 on the final turn of the game is like pretty good. Like being able to play like a big 4 and then like, a medium-sized 2 and have the same power as say their big 6-drop but distributed better because their 6-drop only goes in one lane. That is actually like a very powerful play. That is like, I'm very impressed that you landed on that, because that's like the kind of thing that's like 6 months ago, I would say most Marvel Snap players didn't consciously know that. Like, I would say that was not a thing they were conscious of. And you were conscious of it upon seeing, what, 4 cards? So, that's pretty good.
More options is usually better. But, yeah, the discard effect is just too... Yeah, drawing this early just seems so bad. That's, like, the only trade-off for sure. Because you don't see that many cards.
Yeah.
You don't see that many cards, and then you don't have that many cards either.
The frustrating thing about Hellcow is, like, there is a deck that's like, oh, I have cards that do good stuff when I discard them. Like, the same as the Destroy deck that is, oh, I've got cards that... Yeah, but it's like, even in that deck, she doesn't really make the cut. Sorry, Hellcow, she, cow, not bull, right? Gotta be female. But yeah, even in that deck, she doesn't really make the cut. Like it's like even there, she's not it. When the game was released, she was, or not when the game was released, in beta, she was a 2/6. She was way better than when she was just like a 2/6, and it was just like, this is just so far above rate. Extremely good card. You just play it like she was the 2 you would play with the 4. And so it would be like that's a much, much better card. They eventually had to nerf her for, obvious reasons.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Cerebro. 3/0. Ongoing ability. So the entire rest of the game. Your highest power cards have +2 power.
Okay. So we're spending 3 the highest power cards. So everything with, like, if you had 3 things in play with 4 power, they'd all be worth 6.
Yep.
Okay. Well, it definitely seems like a deck could be built around this, and this is kind of like your... I guess you don't have to play this immediately. You can play this whenever. So you could play this on 3, and then the rest of your deck, or majority of it, would have to have same power level to be able to take full advantage of this. Or yeah, majority of it I would assume. Like if you had this plus a bunch of, I don't know, 3 drops maybe, or other
it's
drops that
power, like not
power.
cost.
Yeah, not drops. Yeah, but like other drops that had the same power level. So it seems like this could be pretty good. It just depends on how many. I just don't know how many other cards have similar power levels enough to the point where that would make sense to play a card like this.
I will tell you, you can make multiple decks with this card. Like, there are enough cards in the game that you can play, Cerebro and 2 drops, Cerebro and 3 drops. Like, you can do that. You can do it. I'm going to be purposefully vague on the word can there, though. I'm just going to highlight that you can do it. I'm not going to tell you whether or not you should, because that's your job.
Yeah. This definitely seems like a card, like, as more cards are revealed, this card seems like it only just gets better, or the potential for it just gets better. So the more and more cards that come out, the better this card gets. Been out for a little while. When did this card come out?
It's been in the game forever.
Forever? All right. I'll go ahead and say this card is good. But yeah, no knowledge of the current card pool doesn't really. It means it's gonna be tough for me to evaluate this one.
Can I ask why when it came out would have mattered?
I feel like, man, I don't know if I have really a great answer for that. I was just kind of curious, to be honest, more so than anything. But I feel like, I guess if it had come out sooner, I feel like, or it had come out Yeah, if it had just dropped recently, it feels like a card that would have dropped with other cards around it that would have probably made it good. But I don't really quite know how cards are released in Snap. So, or like, what is the if obvious synergies are trying to be put into effect immediately with a card reveal or a card release, or if cards are just kind of released and it's like it might be good now, but it might be good later, or what is the general um generally how powerful are cards when they immediately release, and it's like the things have to be nerfed around them afterwards. 'Cause I guess it would make sense for them to want to have the newest cards be playable.
I would say that it trends towards the second, but yes, they want their new cards to be playable at least. They
Yeah, you
want them
can't
to be,
really.
I would say, interesting would be how I would
Yeah, you
phrase
can't fault them too much for that, for sure. Also, I'm sure the players want the cards to at least be interesting, for sure. You want to at least like for it to come out and be like, all right, I'm gonna try and make a deck around this or include it in a deck to see how good it is,
it.
instead of being like, no, that's terrible. I'm never gonna even touch that card.
We're coming off a month where players complained pretty consistently about how mid the cards coming out were. And it's like
Mhm.
3 of those cards that came out in that month are in, I would argue, top tier decks right now. And players were still like, oh, these cards are mid. Because they aren't like the key card in a top tier deck. Like
Just like a
they're
good
in it. Yeah,
addition.
just like a good addition. Yes. So it's like, okay, like that's sort of where the standards are at for new cards, I guess. It's not where my standards are at for new cards. I thought those were good cards, but like that definitely does speak to like it's not just the devs that want these cards to be good, it's the player base that wants these cards to be good too.
Yeah, yeah.
That said, Cerebro is, I would describe it as the ultimate meme card. This is the, like, I don't know if you've played other games where it's like there's like one card that everyone just sort of latches onto and like that's the gag card. And it's like just good enough to be an actual deck, but not good enough to do anything real. That's
Yeah.
Cerebro. Cerebro is like the meme dream card of Marvel Snap. There is no other card that comes close to it in terms of that. It is like almost never above 50% win rate. Like, just
Of
isn't a
course,
thing
Cerebro.
that is ever going to be above 50% win rate. One time it was playable as like a very specific counter to a very specific deck. And I think every other time it has been like, there are 8 decks better than this. And if you're playing this, you're doing it because you're trying to like be funny.
You're trying to win with Cerebro. That's
Yes.
basically it. All right. Well, I'm
Yes.
holding out hope for the future as we get more cards. I mean, this can only get better with more cards. But
Yeah, yes, but like, what if they release a card that's like, that just like kills Cerebro, right? So like, it
I mean, yeah,
can,
that would
like,
stop it.
yeah, it's like, like, I feel like I hear that a lot in Snap where it's like, oh, this card is so open ended, it can only get better, and I can't think of a single time when one of those like open ended cards actually like got better on its own.
It actually
Like,
makes its way there.
yeah,
Yeah.
I've never seen it happen. Shang-Chi, again,
Yeah.
ignore the AVX thing; it's not real. 4/3 on reveal. Destroy all enemy cards here that have 10 or more power.
Okay. So the question just is how often do enemy cards have 10 or more power?
Yep.
From what I've seen so far, I don't think it's that often, but I could actually just see this being a counter card, even to something like the Venom card. Like they play Venom, you play Shang-Chi, their Venom gets destroyed. So I would say it seems like a good card as like a counter to certain decks, but it's probably not neutrally included in just decks. Yeah, you're probably just is not neutrally included in a deck unless there is enough high power cards in the meta.
This card is the card that is
The
neutrally
card
included in decks.
is there
It's
that much that get to 10 or
yes.
more power?
Yes, like this is when you look at like how Marvel stat games tend to play out, right? The one drops kind of suck, right? We've sort of been through that,
Yep.
right? So why do the one
Oh, yeah.
drops suck? The one drops suck because there's these big bodies on the back end that just like totally invalidate them, right? You even like a smaller big body, like something you pay like a 4/9 or whatever. That's
Yeah.
still invalidating a bunch of one drops, right? Shang-Chi is great because there are a lot of decks that are just like, I'm gonna play a really big guy, and then I'm gonna play a couple more really big guys, and that's how I'm gonna win this game. He is universally applicable. There are very few decks that legitimately can ignore him. We've had metagames that are defined by finding decks that ignore this guy and like just
So
playing those instead.
how many decks, like how many top tier decks include Shang-Chi right now?
Right now, I mean, right now we're in a pretty tough metagame where you could argue there's actually only one top tier deck and it does
Oh
have
no.
Shang-Chi. But I think that like generally what you would see is like probably, 50% or more are gonna be playing this card.
Okay,
It's
okay.
not like,
All right.
it's not like, Jace the Mind Sculptor in Magic where it was just like 100% of good decks are playing this card. But it's
Yeah, so
like,
that
yeah, it's probably the most played card in the game at high
yeah,
level.
that was my hang up. From what we've seen so far, it doesn't seem like that much stuff is getting to over 10 power, but if yeah, that makes sense then for sure. That should just be
Yeah.
including everything because it is just like kind of like a destruction card.
Yep.
Again, if it's a destruction card against most decks, then yeah, playing him kind of makes sense for sure.
Yeah, there just aren't other ways to get rid of your opponent's stuff. Like there's not a
Yeah.
lot of interaction in Marvel Snap, and so what we do have is this, and this is good interaction for Marvel Snap, bad interaction for like most other games, but we got to take what we can get
I'm curious then, how long has this card been out?
whole time.
Okay, whole time. And
This card is
has it been like that level of a card since beta or since
yep,
whenever?
pretty
Okay,
much.
okay.
It's a card that I think for most people it took a while to really figure out how good it was and why it was that good. But at least by the time official release came around, it was like, okay, yeah, this is like one of the best cards in the game. And for the last, I would say probably 4 or 5 months, it's been like, not only is this one of the best cards in the game, you see it probably 60% of the time. Like he's in a lot of stuff. He's like not necessarily like a very complained about card relative to other cards that you see a lot, I would say, because he does
Yeah.
have this sort of role of like format cop. Like he lets decks that are lower powered compete with like super big stuff, but he's just generally very good.
Or Matt Cop.
Yeah.
All
He's
right, sounds good.
yeah.
So a lot of is a lot of high power cards. High power cards. All
Yeah.
right.
Let's
More
take a
information
look.
for me to work with.
Let's take a look at a high power card.
All right.
Magneto, 612. On reveal, move all enemy 3 and 4 cost guards to this location.
Hmm. I mean, that seems pretty good. You get some board, not destruction, but manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can go from your opponent having. How would that work if your opponent has more than 3 or 4 cost cards, or if there's like already something there? Like if they have four, if there's something on your opponent's side of the location, and then they also have 4 3 drops at a different location. What happens when you play Magneto?
Typically, the way these things tend to work is either it picks randomly
Huh.
or it picks them in play order, but it will not pull all of them.
Okay, okay.
Like the
Yeah,
fundamental
one
thing
is
is
not
it
just
will
like
not pull all of them.
Okay, okay. So yeah, one is not just left out and destroyed or something.
Nope, it's one of them's going to stay where it is.
Okay,
With
makes
Magneto,
sense.
I believe it is random. So he's just going to like randomly pull. Like if they have
Okay.
a bunch of 4s, he's just going to be like, "I'm picking these ones," and they're going over here.
Makes sense. All right. Well, I mean, I don't know. This card seems pretty good. I haven't seen a ton of cards with destruction or manipulation on like moving your opponent's characters around. There might be more than I think, but this seems decent. Play it on 6, and then you kind of like, a location that you were losing, you're now winning because you took some 3s or 4s from there, and then you can pull them over to one of your spots where you're also beating them out on power. So yeah, I'm gonna say Magneto is probably pretty good. Seems pretty good.
Yeah, he's a great card. One of
Good
the
one.
key things about Magneto is exactly what you identified, which is that he can affect multiple lanes despite only being played in one. And
Yeah.
one of the big weaknesses of a 6 drop is it only goes in one spot. It only affects one lane. You put a bunch of power in one lane and your opponent targets the other two. We talked about the 4 and the 2. If they can swing those other lanes with the 4 and the 2, you play the 6, you die. And Magneto is a way of sort of immunizing yourself from that. You are playing a 6 drop that, if you math it out correctly, can absolutely win you the game. And winning games on turn 6 is important because, I mean, you played Marvel Snap, there's a snap mechanic, right?
Yeah.
Winning those games when the stakes are higher on turn 6 has extra value. Baron Mordo, 2/3. On reveal, your opponent draws a card. Set its cost to 6.
All right. So this seems like 2 3 is like nothing special, right? So it's all about the
Correct.
effect. Giving your opponent an extra card doesn't seem great, but you are setting its cost to 6. So if you like take one of their 2 drops, 3 drops, or like even 4 drops and making it a 6 cost, I guess you could even maybe making the 5 drop a 6 drop. That's not great for them. They are going to see the majority of their deck eventually. this card doesn't seem bad, but I have nothing to compare it to as far as the other effects of 2-drops or how good 2-drops are in general.
Mhm.
So that's the information I'm lacking here. It's just like, do we really want to play something on 2 for tempo purposes? And then what are the other effects that 2-drops have? Give your opponent an extra card. If you're making it cost 6, giving your opponent an extra card honestly doesn't seem that bad. The only thing would be that now your opponent is more likely to see more of their deck overall. And if but with that in mind, I just don't know what they're trying to see specifically. Because no matter what, they'll be able to play. If you like give them their 6-drop, it just costs 6. So then it's just like they can play it no matter what. Or if they don't give their 6-drop, you're getting them closer to their 6-drop. Also, I don't know how many 6-drops decks usually play. So I would assume it's probably around 2. Maybe it is just 1. Because I guess you can only play 1 throughout the game. So it probably is around 1 6-drop that you would play. So it would kind of make, on average or above average, most of the time, whatever card you're giving your opponent, they're not going to be able to play unless they don't want to play their 6-drop all of a sudden. And I assume almost every deck plays a 6-drop. So I'm going to go with this card is pretty good because you're basically locking one of your opponent's cards out of the game. You are letting him see that extra card, though. You're letting him see further into their deck. That one actually is kind of tough. You're letting him see further into their deck, which increases their odds of seeing their 6-drop to begin with, but it is locking out the possibility of them even using whatever card you gave them. I'm gonna go with it's a good card though, because the effect's kind of cool. I like the effect. That's a cool effect. And yeah, the 2 pieces of information I'm kind of missing is just like how important is it to play a 2-drop, and what are other 2-drop effects? I feel like overall the 2 pieces of information I'm missing, but I would say it's a good one overall because the effect is cool.
Typically, this is one of the worst cards in the game.
No.
For for exactly the reason you mentioned. You're just getting your opponent, you're drawing them a card, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
you're
you're
drawing them
making
a
that
card.
card unplayable, but like it's not actually unplayable. And even if it was, that would just be like, okay, take the top card of your opponent's deck and put it on the bottom. Like,
Yeah.
that's not an
Yeah.
effect. That's just doing nothing, right? It's like the top card and the bottom card are equally likely to be relevant, right? And
Yeah.
so when you're drawing them further into that, it basically is an effect that not only does it do nothing, it actually does draw them a card, and some of the time that's a card they can play. So it ends up in just like this very weird spot as like this very unplayable 2 that people play thinking it's disruption when it's actually just not disruption. It's like
Yeah, it is. It
marginal.
does. It does kind of make it. It would just be like you could lock them out of like ever playing like the 3-drop or the
Yeah.
4-drop. And you do see like the majority of your cards throughout a game, so the chance that you get into your 6-drop or whatever other drop you wanted is likely. I guess there's like no. I would assume there's like no search in
You
Snap, right?
would assume correctly.
Yeah, there's no way
Yeah.
to like interact with the last 3 cards of your deck usually, right? Like those
Yeah.
are what you just didn't get access to this game, and that kind of
Yes.
stinks. Yeah, I guess Baron does give you +1 access to your deck overall throughout a
Mhm.
game. So that does make sense for sure. Yeah, even at the cost of like locking them out of a card, it doesn't really matter. The trade off of whatever you were going to see anyways doesn't really matter because like you're
Right.
either it's just like basically not seeing the card to begin with.
Right. Like this is yeah, it's effectively just like, oh, that card was on the bottom this time. Okay,
But
cool.
you could play a 3-drop for 6 if it just made sense in the moment as well, I guess. So you still have the
Correct.
option.
Right. Or it could just hit a 6-drop and you're just like, oh, that just
And then
drew
it's
me a
just
card
yeah.
for free. And it's just like that. Yeah. So like Baron is like this card where it's like vanilla stats, effect that looks interesting, but is bad. And like that's part of why I put him on here. Like most of the time, it's just like that's what Baron is here to do. So, shout out to Baron Mordo. This is the best he's ever been is tricking Azul. So we did it.
What is the? I'm actually curious. Then, like, how many is playing a 2-drop on 2 pretty
Yeah.
relevant to do?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, they're like after one, it becomes like a lot more relevant.
You want to
There's
stay on
actually,
tempo
yeah,
after 1?
depending on what you do, right? Like, but for
Yeah.
the most part, like a lot of decks are like really playing stuff on 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. Like those are playing on one. There's actually an interesting story because part of the reason this game doesn't have mulligans is because I mean it's 12 card decks, but they made a card called
Yeah, yeah.
Quicksilver, which is a 1/2 that always starts in your opening hand. And
Okay.
that's like your pseudo mulligan, right? But one of the things that Quicksilver taught people is that like just curving out sucks. Using that space in your hand on a 1/2 instead of like on a card that could matter later is something that's just like not very good. And so you
Yeah,
end
so
up
just
in a spot,
having
yeah.
just literally having +1 option of a higher value card, even if you'll never play it, is better than having a 1/2
Yes.
in play.
Yes, like curving 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, way less important than 2, 3, 4,
Having
5, 6.
Yeah, then having like an extra 4 drop in your hand to have the option of 4 drop A or 4 drop B, right? Like
Correct.
that's better.
That's a lot better.
Has it ever felt like they try to put more emphasis on curving out as a one
No.
drop, or has it always felt like they don't like the game in general? The game designers don't care if you use 1 drops or don't.
I mean, like, okay, there are decks that are pretty one drop heavy, but they're one drop heavy in a synergistic way rather than
Mhm.
being one drop heavy in like an I'm playing a 1-2 way. Like
Yeah,
they're like if you're doing one drop stuff, it's usually very specific.
yeah, okay. So you're not, yeah. It's like for tempo purposes, 1 drops don't really matter.
Yeah, you're not putting one drops in your deck unless they're doing something extremely relevant to your game plan most of the
Yeah,
time.
okay.
You're
More
not
more
doing
so
it for
about
the sake of
synergy.
curving. Yeah, it's about synergy. Mockingbird 5/9 costs 1 less for each of your cards in play that did not start in your deck.
Well, that's potentially a lot of power for, I guess, 0 cost.
Yeah.
But I mean, it just comes down to, I would assume this card is just good. I guess it could just be bad if like the other cards that, I'm assuming this combos with some other cards that put cards into play. The question is, how good are those cards as well? Because even if this gets to a 0 cost, the 9 power might not make up for having 0 power in play. So, but I don't know. It seems like if a card has this kind of synergy, I would assume it is. I'm gonna go ahead and say it is good. Also, I guess like one of the things I'm like thinking about with this as well is like there's no rotation. Cards are always coming out. So more and more cards. Like I feel like all these kind of cards will eventually have a point in the meta where they'll be good, and then eventually too good, and then will need to be nerfed, or something around them will need to be nerfed, because eventually there'll just be enough different cards that put cards in play that didn't start in your deck that, yeah, there's no way this card wouldn't be good. But I don't know if we're at that point in Snap right now. So it feels like this card is either good or inevitably will be good, and then something, it'll either need to get nerfed eventually if it becomes too good, or something around it will be need to get nerfed. So I'm gonna go ahead and say, I guess maybe we're at that point. I'm going to say this card is good.
Yeah, one of the best cards in the game. Because even if it's
Okay.
not like a 0, it's like, okay, you get like
Even for
1 or
two.
2. It's like, okay, that's a 3. That's a
Yeah,
3/9 or a 4/9, and that's still really good, right? Like that's
a lot of
still
power.
like you're bumping yourself effectively 1 up on the curve, right? Like a 3/9 is bigger than any 3 drop ever. So
Yeah,
that's really,
exactly.
really good. And
Makes
so
sense.
I would say this card is right now, I would describe it as one of the best cards in the game. We'll see how like things change going forward because
Is
I
this in the? You said there was like, it's like you're in a tier
oh
0
yeah.
format, right? This
Oh
is in the tier
yeah.
0 deck. Okay,
Oh yeah.
okay,
This is the tier 0 deck. Like
okay, okay,
this card coming out is what made it tier 0. Like this is
okay.
like the thing that was so there is one way in Marvel Snap to get a lot more cards that didn't start in your deck into play than others. And that one way was very buoyed by the existence of this card, and it was already one of the best decks.
Oh, okay. So it was like a good deck, and then it just got mega buffed by
Yeah, it was like
Mockingbird.
already very good, and then it got like a 0/9, and it was just like, okay, like
Pretty good.
cool.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that what is the? I'm actually curious then. What is the expected adjustment gonna have be? Do you guys already
I'm
like
not
the next
sure.
patch notes already out, or like
No, no,
is
no,
something
no, no. The
something will
patch
happen? I
notes,
assume.
release with the patch, so we don't
Okay.
know.
Okay.
But there is a patch scheduled for, I believe, a few days from when we're recording this. By the time this comes out, it might have already been patched. Who knows?
Okay.
So I put it on the end here because it's like maybe this card actually eats a nerf straight up, and that way, like no one watching only the first 5 minutes of this is gonna be like, "Cam, you moron! This card got nerfed." If I release it like a week from now instead of 3 days from now,
Yeah. What
Uh,
is
I,
the
mm,
based on trends, buffs and nerfs trends in the past? Do you
mm.
expect this card to be nerfed with the next patch?
I would expect cards around it to get nerfed because
Not
nerfing it
this
doesn't
one
make
though.
a ton of sense. Like
Okay.
nerfing it for the problems caused by the cards around it feels like making a card that could be exciting in other situations. Like it's only very specifically an issue in this context, right? So I
Yeah.
would try changing the context and then letting her play out. And then if she's still messed up, it's like, okay, let's go ahead and like nerf her. But like I think the fact that the deck was already so good and so consistently good before her, it's just like the deck itself is too good at adapting. As soon as it gets a tool, it just explodes right back into the metagame.
Yeah.
I would look at fixing the underlying issue first, And then if it turns out, she's still too good, sure, like shave some power off of her. That's fine, I guess.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And how often do they usually let a deck or a card like this ride out before they make a change? Because I'm sure they want like a little bit of time, and like I'm sure they don't hate even if there's something broken. Everyone likes playing with broken stuff for a little bit, but eventually it does get tiring and boring. Like, how quickly do they ever like hot fix anything? Like they're like, wait,
Yes.
this is way worse. This is way better than we thought it was.
Yeah.
24 hours after we release it, make a change.
Never 24 hours, but like within weeks. Like
Okay.
we're talking like, like there was a card that was probably like the best card ever that was released, and it came out and it got like absolutely obliterated into the dirt within like 3 weeks. It was like this card was on the season pass. And they were like, we cannot have this card exist anymore. They crushed it. They only just now brought her back to like a reasonable semblance of playability, and it is with one extra cost and one less power on her repeatable effect. So it was like this is a card that like got absolutely nuked into the dirt and is still playable and good now with significant adjustments, making her significantly worse. And they only just like we're like 5 months out from that now. They were only just now comfortable to be like, let's at least try bringing her back. Like they will, if things are really bad, they will nuke it. One thing that will happen though is there's like a disconnect between high level play and like the overall experience. So like there's going to be these decks that are way better at high level play and very okay, and a deck that falls into that margin where it's like okay for normal players but really good for high level players can become a really big pain in the ass at the top end of the game because they don't see the data that would suggest that it needs to be nerfed. It's just only being played at a high level by high level players.
Yeah, definitely. There needs to be like a balance to both. I feel like when I played League of Legends, there was a lot of that when there was like they're trying to balance high level play and like casual play.
Yeah, and so like luckily when it comes to this card, it's like, well, it's very hard for anyone to mess up a 0-9. So I would imagine that this one scales pretty well. Like high level players, they do well with it, but so do not high level players. Like it's hard to mess that one up. And there's not a lot of intricacy to playing a 0-9. And so that's part of the reason why I would expect it to get hit at some point.
Makes sense.
Jean Grey. Ongoing ability. Players must play their first card here each turn if possible.
When it says must play their first card, the first card they go to play or the first card in their hand?
The first card they go to play. Whatever they want to play that turn, it has to go where she says.
I mean, speaking in terms of just like board manipulation, board control, destruction, it's a 3-drop for 3. I mean, that seems pretty good. As like a way to like prevent your opponent from playing a 6-drop where they want to, more so than anything. What does it mean by if? Oh, and again, unless it's full, right? Unless there's 4. Okay.
Unless it's
full. I would say this card seems pretty good to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and say this one's. It's like kind of like it's. I guess I was gonna say it's kind of like Magneto Light, but even then it could be better. Because like Magneto would be like an end game way to force your opponent to an awkward spot. This could also be a way to force your opponent to an awkward spot, especially like if you played this on 5 going into turn 6, and then you force your opponent 6 drops somewhere else. Like that seems pretty good to me. So I'm gonna go with this as a good card.
Unfortunately, that would be an incorrect read. Jean is like
it's both of you though, isn't it?
Yes. Oh,
okay.
Yes.
Yes. I was just kind of thinking about the opponent's side of the field, but forcing you to also do the same thing.
Yes.
It seems like it's pretty limited then. Yeah, definitely for sure.
Yep. It forces you to break the symmetry, and there just aren't enough good ways for you to do that like your opponents sometimes can't also do. She's very much like a build around where the payoff isn't all there because you have to build your whole deck to make her work. And it's like, all right, I built my whole deck to make this 3/3 mildly restrictive card work, whereas like Magneto, you just chuck that in whatever. It's like I'm Magneto, I do my thing regardless, right? And that's like the fundamental difference is yes, it is both players have to play there. And I think that's probably a good thing because this is a card where I look at it and I'm like, if this card actually was good, that would suck.
If it just forced your opponent, like I thought it did, then that seems way better than forcing you to also play all of your cards on one side.
It seems really unpleasant if that card had the text that that you think it might have in another game. Like I think in another game with like that was maybe further down the road in terms of design. Like if Marvel Snap had been around for as long as Magic had, I think that this this card would say your opponent has to do that, but I don't think
Yeah.
Marvel Snap could get away with that right now. I think it would be a pretty miserable experience.
That sound great. Have to make it a higher cost too, probably. It being a 3-drop and then forcing your opponent to that seems pretty good. That was and that was my initial thought process. It was like you
Yeah.
just force them to play it all here. Put it on like the useless location, the one you're not going for, the one with like the worst. Because if you're winning a location, you get a reward, right? You gain the reward from the location. Yeah.
Not necessarily like a reward. If you're winning a location, you can win the game with it. Like you
Yeah,
win
but
2 out of 3
oh,
locations.
okay.
Like there are some locations that sort of give you rewards effectively. Like there's like a Baxter building location that like when you're winning it, you get +3 to your other locations. But not every location gives you a reward.
Oh, so not every location has a bonus effect.
Yeah, sometimes. Well, every location has an effect, but sometimes it's
Okay.
just like, you know, all units here get +1 power. You know,
Okay.
it's not like something that's going to impact cross board most of the time.
Makes sense.
You ready for a lot of reading?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, Thanos. At the start of the game, shuffle the 6 Infinity Stones into your deck. The Infinity Stones, it's a lot of cards, yes. He's 7 cards. The Space Stone says, next turn you can move a card to this location and you draw a card when you play it. Reality Stone changes the location it is played on and draw a card. Time Stone draws a card and gives that card -1 cost. Mind Stone draws 2 1-cost cards from your deck. Power Stone is an ongoing ability where if you play all the stones, Thanos has +10 power. Soul Stone, enemy cards here have -1 power. And Thanos is a 6/10 and purple with a very large chin.
Yeah. So when you first started reading them, I was like, okay, these are 1-drops, but they are adding bad cards to your deck. Like you're top decking 1-drops, but they all drew a card to begin with.
4 of them do, yeah.
Yeah, 4 of them do, and the other 2 don't, which that kind of stinks as you like progress through the game because you only get 6 turns.
Yep.
So I'm gonna go ahead and say this card is bad. Like this puts too many 1-drops in your deck. You're not gonna see your good cards. I feel like you just never like. Well, there's the one that draws. It takes 2 stones out of your deck. So if you hit that one first, I'm gonna go ahead and say it's bad. I think it's putting way too many potential 1-cost top decks or 1-drop top decks in your deck.
This is the best deck in the game. This is the tier 0 deck. Those stones don't start in your deck, so they're how you get Mockingbird free.
Okay.
That's
so
the thing.
Mockingbird, and then
yes,
all right.
That's the thing that happens, right? Like, so not only that, like the stones are good, and they say draw a card on them, right? So it's like
most of them,
yeah. Most of them say it's like the one you did correctly analyze, like the one that draws 2. That's the busted one.
That's the one you want to draw. You want to draw that one, get the other ones out of your deck for sure as soon as possible.
Like turn 1 Mind Stone is one of the strongest plays in the game, but like basically the way this deck works is you go like ideally you play like turn 1 Mind Stone, you play a bunch of other stones, you like just play a bunch of stuff, play a bunch of stones, free Mockingbird, something big, something big, something big. That's how the deck works, right? You're just like, here's a bunch of stones that I get to play for free effectively in terms of card economy because they're drawing cards or whatever like that.
Yeah, you're not losing card value on most of them. But yeah, and the thing that I did almost say that I was hung up on though for a second was I was going to say, I don't think they would make Thanos bad. So I was going to say because of that, he's probably good. But I was like, I don't know. It feels like there's a lot of bad. You fill your deck with a lot of bad top decks. Most of them do draw +1 card though. So
it's very weird actually because like when this card first came out, I had the same analysis. I was like, this is my favorite card they've ever made, but I don't think it's very good. Yeah. And it took a couple months past global release for people to figure out like, no wait, this card actually is very good. There have been multiple ways for this card to be good, but most of them have typically involved doing something oppressive in a generally like mid-range draw cards, play big stuff shell. That's what Thanos has been about basically the entire time. Is like it's a mildly more efficient ramp deck, right? Because you have the green stone, which until recently just gave you an extra energy, so like it was doing the Electro thing a lot of the time.
Yeah.
They changed that, but unfortunately Mockingbird came out and just sort of made a mockery of all the things that they were going to like they were trying to do to make Thanos worse. Because this was already like one of the best decks, but Mockingbird.
They're setting it up to take it down a peg, and then Mockingbird came out and then brought it back up.
Yeah, that's pretty much what happened. Like they like nerfed a key card in it. They nerfed a stone. Mockingbird came out and was like, "Hey, remember when you nerfed that stuff? It doesn't matter anymore. I have a 0/9." And
Yeah.
that's pretty much the state of the meta as is. Hopefully, they're going to end up changing some of it in the near future. So by the time this video comes out, let me know in the comments if they did something good because I really hope they did. All right. That's going to be it from me. Azul, where can people find you? What can they expect when they do?
Yeah, so you can check me out on Twitch and YouTube at AzulGG. Follow me on Twitter as well if you want, Azul_GG. And I just do a lot of content around the Pokemon trading card game, gameplay, deck profiles, and stuff like that. Talk about like new cards coming out as well, what I think of them, how good I think they will be, what I think they can do. Yeah, check me out over there if you're interested in the Pokemon TCG.
I like my impression that I got from like I guess in theory you'd call it doing research for this video, but what it actually is like watching your stuff is that like you're an incredibly good like if you want to get into, competitive Pokemon
Yeah.
TCG, like you're the guy. Like that's the guy that you people go to for that. So like genuinely, like I think that is sort of how like I would describe you as like if you're watching this and you're interested in the Pokemon TCG, this is the guy. Like, if you're already watching me, you're like some degree interested in competitive content. And if you're interested in the Pokemon TCG, he's the guy to go to for that, as far as I can tell.
I appreciate it. Yeah, my stuff definitely leans way more towards like the competitive side of things than casual as far as playing goes as well, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It was a blast. Does this make you more interested in playing Marvel Snap or just the same amount of non-interested?
It does. It does. I just wish I had more time. I really don't have time to like pick up any other game. Maybe this will replace. I mean, like my go-to other game that I play, card game that I play when I'm not doing Pokemon stuff is Hearthstone Battlegrounds.
Sure.
Maybe
Yeah.
I'll have, and it's just because it's like a little bit more convenient and like easy to do. Like I wanted to try and get into like Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic, but there's such more of a commitment because I want to try and be competitive in it. But being like competitive in Hearthstone Battlegrounds is like not too difficult to do. Pretty low barrier of entry and everything. Snap is like the same way though, like to get going and just like start playing the game. So maybe I will give Snap another shot here.
It
I
is
just don't have
pretty
that much
high
time to.
investment. Like it
I
is
don't have that
pretty high
much time to
investment.
do. I don't still have that much time. My biggest thing is
Yeah.
time,
Eh.
but yeah.
Snap, in terms of time demands, Snap really just demands you like log on, do your dailies, log
Yeah.
off. But in terms of monetary demands, like if you really want to keep up, I would argue that it's pretty significant. I'm going to be real with you. I think it's pretty significant because they're like if you're coming from another game, right? Like you go to TCG Player, you order your deck, and you're like,
Yep.
I have that deck, and I will play it until rotation, right? Like I could just
Mhm.
do that, right? You can't do that in Snap. The new card comes out, and you gotta get it, and it's like really expensive, and it's like it's a whole thing. I would say that there is an issue.
Can you just like buy the card straight up, or do you have to like?
Nope.
There's not like. I guess you have to like craft into it, or
Yeah,
okay.
you gotta like there's like several layers of currency obfuscation between you and a card at any given time. It's honestly like I'm a Marvel Snap, like that's what I do. I do Marvel Snap stuff. It is the worst thing about the game is card acquisition by far.
All right. Maybe I'll have to put Snap on the back burner for now. But definitely it interests me more for sure. Having done this video, looked at the cards, understood the game and like the interactions and stuff a little bit more. I'm definitely interested. A little bit more intrigued than I was before this video for sure.
Yeah, I just didn't want to oversell you. I didn't want to be like, oh, it'll be so easy. Oh, yeah. I heard from KM Best that like I can play Marvel Snap only a few times every day and I'll get all the cards. Nope, I'm not telling you that. I'm not doing it. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for watching. I'll see you.